should the president listen or should the president defy?
If a district court judge tries to usurp the authority of the chief executive of this country, he should absolutely defy it. There's a difference between broad policy decisions and discrete disputes between parties. That's the difference. If I want a policy decided, I'll take it to the Supreme Court.
Scott Jennings just went nuclear on this so-called expert panel, exposing their absolute cluelessness in real time. This wasn't just a debate for Scott Jennings. This was a total beatdown of woke nonsense. Scott Jennings went all in, calling out the ridiculous overreach of activist judges trying to undermine the executive branch. Scott Jennings didn't hold back on the media spin, judicial overreach, and anti-Trump bias that's infecting the system. Scott Jennings is not holding back. The panel tried their usual mental gymnastics to justify their nonsense, but Scott Jennings tore them apart piece by piece. But enough talking, and let's get into this complete shutdown by Scott Jennings.
But we do know that judges do get to say whether the executive is complying with the law or not. That's been the case for decades, hundreds of years.
Well, I think there's a difference between saying whether you're complying with the law and then you have these individual district court judges setting effectively broad federal policy that is specifically reserved for the President of the United States. I think we do have a constitutional crisis, and it's being caused by these judges. They're not here to tell us. They're not here to tell us how to spend the money. They're not here to set broad federal policy. That is the president's job as elected by the people. These judges are supposed to be settling discrete, specific matters, not policy setting. I think Vance is right. I think Trump has a point. And these judges want nothing more to continue the lawfare against Trump.
I don't think anybody's going to be surprised to hear that you think Trump is right.
They're doing this on purpose.
However, just on a real important technical point here, one of the main disputes is whether the executive branch can just decide not to spend money that another co-equal branch has said ought to be spent. So it's not just about forcing the federal government to spend money. It's saying Congress said you need to spend this money this way, and the executive branch saying, no, I don't feel like it, and the courts say you have to
Well, my answer to that simply is, it is the executive branch's job to figure out how to spend money once it is appropriated by Congress. And sometimes they spend money that's not been appropriated. But the correct political control is between the executive and the Congress, not some random
I want to return to that because that is also a major legal question.
Do you really think that J.D. Vance's tweet is only about these district judges?
I think
this is a slippery slope because they're going to move on to what the next ruling is. They're setting the stage so that they can say that the executive branch has control now over the judicial branch. They're setting the stage. And for people who think...
Yeah, so I mean, this is exactly what Scott Jennings is talking about. The left is always playing the long game, setting things up so that the judicial branch starts running the country instead of the elected executive. Like, I don't know about you guys, but last I checked, we have separation of powers, and the president is supposed to lead, not be micromanaged by a bunch of politically motivated judges. And the fact that Scott Jennings is calling this out while the panel just dodges the real issue, yeah, that tells you everything.
For people who think that President Trump has not planned all of this, he pushes the envelope constantly. There was January 6th. He has a myriad of people out there that would support the executive branch being able to rule over the judicial branch because there have been no repercussions. And when there are not consequences and when there are not repercussions, you get away with it.
I get it. You want individual federal judges who hate Donald Trump
No, I don't.
to tie him up for 4 years.
No, I don't.
If you want a big policy questions decided, let the Supreme Court do it. But in the interim, the executive has to be allowed to govern.
Exactly. Scott Jennings is 100% on point here. This whole district court free-for-all is ridiculous. Like, we have a system, people. The Supreme Court exists for a reason, but no. These judges just randomly throw wrenches into everything because they don't like who's in office. And then the media plays dumb like, oh, well, checks and balances. Nah, this is weaponized lawfare, plain and simple. Scott Jennings is spelling it out, and they still pretend not to get it.
How do we get to the Supreme Court? Can
Just
somebody tell me?
And that's fine, but you can't tie them up
we get
until
to
it
the
gets
Supreme
there.
Court.
You can't tie them up
we
until
get to
it
the
gets
Supreme
there.
Court by the judges ruling, things going to appeal, and then it goes up.
And in the meantime, what happens? Trump can't act? Trump can't act?
In the meantime, you're supposed to comply with the court's rulings. Am I wrong about that?
Well, you're supposed to comply, but Scott's absolutely right in that the court cannot say you have to spend these dollars today. So as a governor, I dealt with this. We got things challenged in state court and federal court. It's all judge shopped, by the way. Judges don't randomly get these cases. There's a reason that these cases are filed in Boston, the Boston court, or a certain district, Rhode Island, because they know they're going to get a judge that is politically
great
favorable.
bipartisan practice as well.
Yeah. Both sides do it. I mean, I think
how many times that district court and judge one guy in Texas shut down Joe Biden?
But you raised the right point. Should the president, the
Biden
singular
administration
president,
actually
should he have to
went
share
along with what the
should
judge
he
said?
have to share the presidency with 300 district court judges? No, absolutely not.
But the point, though, you made a really good point that there have been judges that shut down some of President Biden's executive actions, and they understand, the Biden administration understood the checks and balances.
The Supreme Court tried to stop me, but they never will.
But not in the way that Donald Trump is.
Who said
not
that?
in the way that
Joe
Donald
Biden.
Yeah,
Joe
but
Biden.
Donald Scott, he actually didn't ignore it.
He did.
right.
They continued to plow
No.
forward with
No,
student
he
aid. How
didn't.
much did
No,
they spend?
no.
Let me set the record
Scott,
on
he
this.
We actually got deep into the student
I
loan
hated
debt
the student
forgiveness.
loan forgiveness policy.
What did he say out
Hold on.
loud?
I thought
What
it
did
was.
he say out
I thought it
loud?
was a ridiculous
didn't
policy.
ignore it.
I thought it was unconstitutional. I predicted it would get struck down. It did get struck down, and I
didn't
applauded.
ignore it.
He did not ignore it, though. He went and tried under a different law.
So he ignored
You're
it.
allowed. No,
That's not ignoring it. That
So
is
he
trying
it's not
to
ignoring
be
it. It's
literally
trying to do it.
defied.
It's
He
trying to do
literally
it.
defied it.
But let me just understand where you stand. If a district court judge rules in a way that the president dislikes, should the president listen or should the president defy?
If a district court judge tries to usurp the authority of the chief executive of this country, he should absolutely defy it. There's a difference between broad policy decisions and discrete disputes between parties. That's the difference. If I want a policy decided, I'll take it to the
But what
Supreme
about
Court.
checks and balances?
Well, Scott, you're
Of a
checks and
district
balances.
court judge?
What I
Who
can't
elected
What I
them?
can't get with is you talking in these bizarre, broad generalities.
It's not bizarre.
Every single one of these cases deals with a discrete issue. Okay, it deals with funding. It deals with with certain constitutionally or statutorily appointed roles. Every single one of these things is a distinct thing, and they're all being dealt with by different judges. So it's not broad swaths of policy here. When the court says Congress, appropriated this money, you must unfreeze it while we litigate this. Why can't Trump comply with that?
So you're saying that a judge should decide how and when money is spent
judge is saying
for years, and not the president of the United
Scott,
States?
let me explain
You're a governor,
a little bit
you
more.
know.
Let me explain it a little bit more slowly. A judge is saying
You don't have to talk to me like that.
Congress.
I have a position on this, and you have an opinion. We can disagree.
Yeah, but I'm saying.
Oh man, here we go with the fake outrage. You can literally hear the desperation. Like, listen, Scott Jennings is right, and they hate that he's right. A judge should not be dictating national policy over the elected president, period. These people love pretending that the judiciary should have the final say over everything, but that's not how a republic works. The real issue here is you can tell Scott Jennings is just in complete disbelief here. They don't want the president to actually have power unless it's their guy in charge. The hypocrisy is unreal.
You listen to me because you're not listening and you're making claims that are not connected to the facts. The judge is saying
Maybe you are.
Congress appropriated a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
We need to litigate this.
Okay.
While we litigate this, we're going to put a hold on the actions that you took that might be unconstitutional.
So while we
That's
litigate,
part of the process. Why
this,
can't-
I'm
why
a
doesn't
judge
that
and
work?
I'm in charge of the executive branch, and you're not. Forget it.
Yeah,
I totally
you just
disagree.
can't compel the executive branch to spend the dollars. You can't do that. They
Okay.
can't say we're going to start. The
Have
judges
you
are going to
heard
start
of
writing
the
the checks. They have every
impoundment?
right to
Have you
hold
heard
that.
of the Impoundment Control Act of 1974?
No.
Okay, well, let me play this. Let me play
And by the
this.
way, none of your viewers have
Okay,
either.
well, I'm gonna
I can explain it in a
I'm gonna
sentence.
play this clip for you. This is in Congress. Russ Vought, who is the architect of a lot of this, was being questioned in Congress about the Impoundment Control Act, which actually says that the executive branch should spend the money how Congress appropriated it. Here's what he said is going on right now in the federal government.
Do you believe the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 is the law of the land that you must follow?
It is the law of the land. As you know, the president has run on that issue. He believes it's unconstitutional. For 200 years, presidents had the ability to spend less than an appropriation if they could do it for less. And we have seen the extent to which this law has contributed to waste, fraud, and abuse.
So, Ellie, this is the law of the land. They might be wanting to challenge it, but it is the law.
Right. The Impoundment Control Act says essentially the president cannot block money allocated by Congress. To the power of district court judges, and I understand your point, Scott. I understand the frustration people have when a district court judge blocks a broad mandate from the chief executive, the elected chief executive. Ultimately, the big issues go up to the Supreme Court. But I guess I would ask both of you, what if a district court judge had blocked Barack Obama's DACA plan, the Dreamers plan, right? And he said, heck with you, I'm doing it anyway. Would you be okay with that, or would you have a problem with that?
No,
Would that be okay?
So again, that's where we're forgetting a key piece of the third branch of government. That's where Congress steps in.
Yes.
Right? You have to remember that a judge can't just say, well, I'm going to arbitrarily block something. They say, I'm blocking it because of this, and Congress can step in and be more specific and more refined if they want to.
How does that work with Congress, who's appropriated funds for all of these other agencies?
So it can't work that
and now,
way.
And now the executive branch is stepping on Congress.
If Congress appropriates $20 million for a program, do you, as the chief executive, do I have to spend $20 million on that program?
Well, actually, this is
But
what
do
I'm
I?
trying to. This is why I
Because
brought.
if I don't, what's the number?
I know that
Why
the
not do a bit of an
Hold on,
investigation into it first?
I know that the
instead of-
Impoundment Control Act thing sounds really wonky, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I understand the idea of testing laws. You want to see how far you can go, but the question that you are asking has been answered by the courts, okay? The reason that the Impoundment Control Act exists is to say that when Congress says we appropriate this money, it should be spent that way. That's their power. They have the power of the
Every
purse.
state in the country, when we pass a balanced budget, and I'll explain what a balanced budget is
Again,
to everyone in
it's a
Washington in a minute.
dispute, but I'm
we don't
saying
spend, this
that
called the
hasn't
lapse.
been proven
There's
in the
hundreds of millions
courts.
of dollars in New Hampshire that intentionally do not get spent on certain programs.
What
They're supposed
about
to lapse
what
back
about
into
when
the
the
system.
Trump administration says to Congress, "You created this agency. We're going to just decide it doesn't exist anymore."
He runs the executive branch. He can decide who works for the executive branch.
So
He can decide who
where does
doesn't.
this end?
This guy supporting Scott Jennings just dropped the hammer. That's the $1 million question. Where does this actually end? If judges can just override Congress, override the executive, and run the country from the bench, then what's even the point of elections? Yeah, that's right. There isn't one. This is exactly why Scott Jennings is not letting them off the hook. They're playing this dangerous game where the courts control everything, and then they act shocked when people start questioning the system. Unreal. Scott Jennings and his advocate are dropping some interesting takes, if you ask me.
So Congress creates an agency. The executive says, to heck with it. Congress appropriates money. The executive branch says, to heck with it. Where does this end?
So it ends. You can go back, and I like what they're doing, and they're going to whiteboard these programs out, and they're going to force each of these departments to come back and actually justify their existence, which no one in Washington has done for decades. If you want NIH money to go forward, explain to me why, how, and how it's going to be spent.
All right, so the next
That's all. They're
Democratic
going to
president
force
who
them to
says
the table.
ICE is going to just disappear, I expect that the two of you will say that sounds
I'll-
At the end of the day, Scott Jennings absolutely dominated this discussion. The panel tried every weak argument in the book, and he knocked them all down one by one. The hypocrisy, the fake outrage, the mental gymnastics, it was all on full display. And the best part, Scott Jennings didn't let them get away with it. He called out the judicial overreach, exposed the blatant anti-Trump bias, and showed exactly why this is a constitutional crisis. The panel had no real response, just the usual deflections and nonsense. So yeah, this wasn't even a debate. This was a public execution of bad takes, and Scott Jennings was on point throughout this whole debate, if you ask me. But what do you guys think? Did Scott Jennings stand his ground? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and take care.